Hello everyone, I'm JG. Welcome back to MusicForever, where today I'm going to be reviewing Metallica's self-titled album, better known as the Black Album. Before we start the review, just want to say I've been reviewing all of Metallica's albums here on my channel. Of course, I've only reviewed the ones released up to the Black Album as of now, but I'm going to be reviewing all the other ones in the near future. So if you're a Metallica fan, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on those. And I'm going to have a playlist with all these reviews in them, annotated at the end of the video, and there should be a link down in the description below. So make sure you check those out. The Black Album is an album that typically, if you're a Metallica fan, you either love or hate this thing, because it began to move Metallica in a new direction, that direction being more towards a traditional heavy metal sound as opposed to the thrash metal that they were playing throughout the 1980s. Many old fans dislike this because it was moving away from a heavier sound, a more underground sound, I guess you could say, for a more mainstream sound and a sound that would be consumed by lots of people. But on the other hand, you have people that were just getting introduced to Metallica as a result of this newfound accessibility, and who got into the band as a result of the Black Album, and as a result oftentimes have fond memories of this album and what it meant to do for them. Many people get into Metallica and heavy metal music in general as a result of this album. It's just one of those albums that happens to, help bring people into the genre. Myself included to an extent, because the lead single on this, Enter Sandman, of course, many people say that's the most overrated Metallica song, one of the most overplayed Metallica songs, was also the song that got me into Metallica. Now, I don't think it's their best song, I don't think it's a great song by any means, but I do think it's a decent song. Of course, it is overplayed a ton on, rock radio, stuff like that, but I don't listen to rock radio really, so the song hasn't been super spoiled for me. I vividly remember the first time I listened to Enter Sandman. It was when I believe it was the 6th grade, and I had gotten an iPod for the first time, and I put some songs on it that I was familiar with from games like Guitar Hero and stuff like that. It's really how I found music back when I was a young kid. Then, of course, I began exploring around on iTunes for a bit, and I happened to come across the song Enter Sandman, which I put on my iPod. I got it for some reason, even though I hadn't listened to Metallica ever before. And then, on a car trip somewhere, I was listening to my iPod, and I only had enough songs to really last for, a very short amount of time driving in the car, so I would just hit shuffle on the songs and play through them. So I was just sitting there in the back seat, driving along when Enter Sandman came on, and if you know the song, you definitely know the song. It comes on with that slow building up riff, and at the time I was just completely mesmerized by it. I hadn't heard anything like it. Something so heavy when the riffs came in, and of course just the aggression of the track, it was something that blew me away. And the length also. I know Enter Sandman isn't a particularly long song, but to me at the time it was. It was a brand new world that had opened up to me, and soon enough I'd be exploring other heavy metal and Metallica. So yeah, that's my Enter Sandman story. I do like the track. Like I said before, I don't listen to it a ton. I really only listen to it when I listen to the album all the way through, but it's an enjoyable track. And it really does showcase that move towards a more accessible sound. It's not a thrash metal song really, it just has the more typical heavy metal sound to it, as do a lot of the tracks here on this album. You don't have any crazy solos or anything like that, and the pace of the album is a bit slower. That's not to say it's super slow either. Metallica managed to show a wide array of emotions and different concepts here on this album. Let's take, for example, anger. You have tracks like Sad But True, another rather popular track from this album. And I also do really like this song. I just love the anger and the aggression of it. The riff is also super cool. Definitely one of my favorites here on the album. And of course, what may be my favorite song on the album, The God That Failed, which is about James Hetfield and one of his parents, I believe it was his mother, who died as a result of, I believe it was cancer. And she couldn't get any treatment because of her religious beliefs, and so this track is kind of James Hetfield releasing his anger from that. The bass riff on this is just super cool, and yes, you could finally hear the bass work again on this album. After Injustice for All, you could barely hear it there. Here you can finally hear it again, which is good. And back to The God That Failed, it's another great song. I love the aggression on that track, the slower pace at times. It's not super in your face, but you could really tell that the anger is genuine. Kind of like the track Dire Z from Injustice for All, how I was saying the anger there felt really genuine. It's very much the same here with this track. It sounds very real, very believable. You also see a lot of sadness in these tracks. Take, for example, The Unforgiven, which is about James Hetfield and his upbringing. It's just a very popular Metallica song. Yeah, I think it's one of the better ballad tracks that they've done. The lyrics feel very genuine, very real, and I do like the guitar solo that comes in on the track. I do also enjoy the kind of reversal in the structure, how the verses are a lot more aggressive than the chorus is. Typically in songs, it's the verses that are more, not as aggressive, not as in your face, more lyrical, and then you have the chorus that's very, in your face, very aggressive. This track kind of reverses that, which is very cool. The track Wherever I May Roam is another one of my favorites here. It's another fairly popular song from this album. And I do really like how this song just has a sort of slower, creeping sound to it, I guess you could say. It just kind of builds up slowly, and it has these really cool guitar solo that comes in later on in the track. The lyrics here deal with, touring life for a band. Many bands tend to write about that, and it just makes sense. He's talking about how wherever he goes, that's kind of his home, and he's just kind of king of wherever he is. And given how big Metallica were at the time and how big they were going to be following the release of this album, I think the track makes a lot of sense. While I enjoy the majority of the track listing here on this album, there is one track that I'm not super high on, and that's Nothing Else Matters, which is a rather popular track from this album. And I can understand why it's very popular. It's a ballad track, and it's, technically a love song, which, might seem a bit odd for Metallica, though I've heard that interpretations that it's about the fans and just kind of showing gratitude for the fans, how they love their fans, which does make sense, but, it could also be interpreted just for a significant other, for another person, something like that. And it's not that I'm against Metallica making a metal love song or anything like that, it's just, it comes off as very cheesy. It's, listening to it, it's just, the lyrics aren't that great, it's just kind of painful to listen to at times. With the lyrics here, it's just a whole ton of metal cringe, in my opinion. I typically like James Hetfield as a singer. I like what he could do with more aggressive vocals and more clean vocals, but here on this track, he just kind of sounds, like he's overdoing it. It reminds me a lot of some other 80s bands that just overdid their performances, but here, it's Metallica. I expect better from Metallica than I did some of those bands from the 80s with their cheesy ballads. This feels like it could be one of those. It's just slightly better because it has a great guitar solo in it and better instrumentation. But besides that, it's really not that much worth revisiting. I mean, I understand why people like the track because, it's a love song, can appeal to more people. It's, something that's good to play on the radio like that. But it's just not something I see myself listening to often. I only really listen to it in the context of the entire project. I enjoy the other tracks a lot more. The instrumentation on the Black Album as a whole, I would say, is much simpler than the stuff that Metallica were doing before. Take any of the previous efforts, the thrash metal efforts, I guess you could say, and compare it to this album, and it's clear that those albums are a lot more complex in what they're doing. More complex guitar solos, more complex riffs, and just, everything really is more complex. Here, it's a lot more stripped down, a lot more simple. You have your simple heavy guitar riffs, and your simple metal drumming, and all that stuff, really. But I think it sounds good, and that's the key point. It may not be as complex as the previous stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It just means it's simpler, but it's still simply good. Simply good. The riffs on the album are fantastic. Some of the most recognizable, memorable, and legendary riffs to have ever been put to an album. Of course, tracks like Enter Sandman, like I mentioned before, Sad But True, Wherever I May Roam, just classic riffs here that you see throughout this project. And the drumming here, while it's not as complex as Metallica's previous efforts, I think is still good. The bass work on this album from Jason Newsted is excellent, and of course you can actually hear it this time, which is a big improvement over the last album. And especially on tracks like The God That Failed and Wherever I May Roam have some great bass work. And the vocals here, as I mentioned before, they're not as aggressive as they were on previous Metallica efforts, but James Hetfield's, clean singing voice is pretty good, except for on, Nothing Else Matters, where it's just kind of eh. But on tracks like The Unforgiven and Wherever I May Roam, which also, slow down the pace a bit, you can see that he is a good singing voice for ballad-type songs, which we get to see more on later Metallica albums. Overall, the Black Album for many Metallica fans, as I said before, is an album that you either love or you hate. Either you love the fact that it's Metallica doing a more mainstream sound and that's what you're really into, or you hate the fact that they're doing a mainstream sound because that's what you don't like. But for me, personally, it's a good album. It's not one of their best. It's not a great album, but it's not a bad album by any means either. As I said before, I enjoy the majority of the tracks. It's really just the one track that I'm not that big a fan of. Everything else I enjoy to a degree. It's not as memorable as some of the previous albums, but then again, you can't deny the sticking power of some of the tracks here on this album. Tracks like The God That Failed, Wherever I May Roam, and Sad But True. That's the one. That's another good track. I think claiming it's the best Metallica album might be a bit of a stretch, but saying it's a terrible album or where the band started to go downhill is just not true in my opinion. It's definitely the start of their more, mainstream heavy metal material, but then again, I don't think it started to go a bit more downhill until a bit later on. We'll get there, though. We'll get there. My final recommendation for the album is definitely check it out if you're a fan of metal music. Then again, if you're a fan of metal music and you haven't heard this album before, I really have to question, are you really a metal fan? If you haven't heard this album before, or at least some of the songs from this album. Then again, back to what I was saying. This is definitely you should check this album out. It's not one of the best metal albums ever made in my opinion, but it's definitely one of the most influential. It's one of the most important, and it's definitely one that needs to be checked out still, even if I don't think it's one of the best. If you're a metal fan, it's required listening material just given what it is. So I think that sums up my review pretty well. If you enjoyed the review, make sure you leave a like on the video, comment down below if you have anything you'd like to say, and subscribe to the channel so you can see those other Metallica reviews as they're coming out. And don't forget to check out the ones that are already up on the channel. As I mentioned before, the link will be in the description down below and on the annotation at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the review, and stay golden.